Bravely Second is the second game in the Bravely series. Everyone's saying it's a dumb name, but look how easy that was to explain. It's a sequel to Bravely Default, which released a few years ago, and that was a spiritual successor to a game called Final Fantasy The Four Heroes of Light, which no one played. The Bravely series has a lot in common with Final Fantasy, from mechanics and story arcs to Phoenix Downs. It's pretty much Final Fantasy in every way except name. I love Bravely Default. It had a unique combat system which brought a lot of depth to the turn-based battles. It adopted the fantastic job system as seen in Final Fantasies 3 and 5. It had a stunning art style to it. The soundtrack was an absolute masterpiece. And I just want to mention, the sheer amount of customization in that game's settings was astounding. I never thought that would be something I'd appreciate in a game, but being able to speed up the battle animations, turn the encounter rate up and down or even off, auto battle, the choice of English or Japanese voice acting, one-handed controls, all these things, I just want it in every game now because they're just so useful. Everything from the first game returns in Bravely Second, but where it does begin to fall short is offering something unique that its predecessor didn't. Here's my thoughts. I'll start with the combat because that's the biggest way that Bravely distinguishes itself from other turn-based RPGs. Carrying over from the previous game is the BP or battle point system. One attack costs 1 BP and at the start of every turn you gain a BP. Using Brave allows you to spend BP in advance and attack multiple times in one turn, but you'll go into a BP deficit and won't be able to act again until it stabilizes at 0. Using Default puts you in a defensive state and allows you to store up BP so you don't have to go into the negative and have to wait around unprotected. The combat is virtually unchanged from Bravely Default, and that's a good thing because it's still super fun. It's such a simple mechanic, but the depth that it brings to battles is just exponential. However, a change they have made is in experience modifiers. In Default, grinding was very simple thanks to the one-turn battle bonus, which meant you could brave all your characters and finish almost every battle in a single turn and gain an experience multiplier. Bravely Second drops this in favour of a one more fight function. If you finish a battle in one turn, you can immediately enter another battle, and each subsequent battle increases your multiplier. The catch is, your party's health, afflictions, and most importantly BP, all carry over. Although this does make it harder to grind levels, I love this mechanic because it makes you think about every single battle. It's all about the min-maxing and achieving the most efficient way to defeat all the enemies. I constantly fell on the wrong side of this and I was just left with one enemy with 100 health just sitting there, all because I wanted to save Magnolia for the next battle. For the first time, I think, ever, I found myself examining every single monster to find their weaknesses and checking the defensive properties. It adds a whole extra layer of depth to random encounters, and I actually found these battles more challenging and fun than the boss battles, which was the complete opposite case in Bravely Default. I need all my multipliers, guys. Gotta get them new job abilities. Speaking of which, the job system returns with 13 new jobs and 17 old ones, making for a total of 30. Many of the returning jobs have slight alterations to them, and some of the new ones are just reworks of one or two of the old jobs, but it's a decent and diverse roster. I really love the job system ever since I was first introduced to it in Final Fantasy Tactics Advance as a kid. I always find myself addicted to unlocking new jobs and abilities, and I enjoy the micromanagement of finding new combinations and synergies for my characters and for my entire party. However, with the exception of the freelancer, all the returning jobs are unlocked through optional side quests which make you choose one between two, and you're not able to pick up the other one until you play New Game Plus. I'm not sure why they did this. Perhaps they thought there was too many jobs, or perhaps they thought it was a bit overwhelming having so many side quests so early on. But regardless, both Performer and Pirate are essential to my party and I am not happy about having to choose between them. That's actually Ringabel's Performer costume from Bravely Default, but just look how magnificent he is. I couldn't resist. On top of this, these side quests are almost entirely recycled dungeons from the first game. This would be acceptable if there wasn't any recycling in the main part of the game, but there is, and unfortunately there's quite a bit of it.
Absolutely unacceptable!
One way that the Bravely series does differ from Final Fantasy is that all the games exist within the same world and story. So while it's great revisiting locations and seeing old friends, replaying dungeons from the first game is a bit monotonous and feels kind of lazy. Perhaps some people won't mind as much as I do, and definitely for those who haven't played the game, this isn't going to be an issue at all. In fact, they have made Bravely Second very accessible for new players. You're definitely able to pick this game up having not played Bravely Default, and I'd actually kind of recommend it because you do play so much of the original game's content. You'll miss out on parts of the story, but they do a good job in catching you up, and to be honest, the story is probably the weakest part of the game. It's more just an excuse to change the scenery and make the enemies a bit tougher. The dialogue in general is also not the greatest, but it does have this peculiar charm to it that either you won't be able to stand it or you'll learn to appreciate its quirkiness. The game is genuinely funny at times and even makes fun of its own poor writing in some meta fourth wall breaking scenes.
Hey, don't give me that look. This is a terrible inconvenience.
I find solace in the fact that Bravely Second never takes itself too seriously. Okay, for example, there is a job which just allows you to speak to cats. Every cat. One final note, the soundtrack. The composer for Bravely Default, Revo, wasn't able to return for Bravely Second, so in his place is a man called Rio, who is the songwriter for a J-pop group called Supercell. There's definitely a decent soundtrack here. I think Rio has created something in line with the sound and the feel that Bravely Default had, but that's really about it. It kind of looks and feels like Bravely Default's soundtrack, but feels a bit hollow. It's kind of like Rio has gone, right, orchestras, electric guitars, done. And then forgotten about everything else that made Revo's score really incredible. Default's score was unashamed of its melodies and had these really thoughtfully chosen instruments in them. The best example I can think of is the special attack songs in Bravely Default, where each character had a song and each song had an instrument solo associated with the character. What I'm trying to say is that there's no accordion solo on Bravely Second's soundtrack, but there's nothing even like that. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely a decent soundtrack. There's quite a few tracks that I really quite like. I guess I'm just finding it a little bit difficult to take Bravely Second's soundtrack on its own merits, because I was just such a fan of Revo's work on Default. It's probably one of my favourite soundtracks of all time. There's just really not that many memorable tracks here. A few, definitely a few, but they just don't inspire me in the same way. Alright, so overall, the big question for me is, does this feel like a worthwhile sequel? And I'm not sure. While I do appreciate the refinements made to the game and just returning to the world in general, it isn't as fleshed out as I was hoping and expecting it to be. Oftentimes you'll hear about the sophomore slump, which is when the second release of something isn't as good as the first release. But that's not really a thing in games. In fact, typically the opposite is true. While the first game creates the foundations with building the game engine and the world and the mechanics of it, the second in the series can focus more on the story and fixing the issues from the first game and smoothing the whole thing out. Bravely Second just doesn't do that enough in my opinion. It feels more like an extension of Bravely Default rather than a fully fledged sequel. But with saying that, I'm of the personal belief that if you've made something really great, you're allowed to repeat it once. And that's what they've done here. It's still a really great game. Bravely Third's really going to need something up its sleeve because it can't ride on this same wave forever. I know it's really premature to be saying this about the second game in a series, but I'm kind of just looking forward into the future a little bit. I don't want to end this on a sour note. This is a really great game. It's well crafted, it's enjoyable, especially for those who really loved Bravely Default, and particularly for those who haven't played it. It's a great place to jump in. If you didn't think too much of Bravely Default, then it's safe to avoid this one because it is just much of the same, but other than that, I'd really recommend it. Thanks so much for watching. Please let me know what you thought about this video. I'm always open to criticism. I hope you stick around. I've got a video planned for another couple of weeks' time. But until then, I will see you next time.